Week 34, ELA W, and we are on Wednesday's lesson. So let's begin by going over the grammar, do now, and we'll read these first four rules about how to incorporate dialogue into our narrative. So we're going to use narrative techniques such as dialogue, description, and pacing to develop experiences and events or show the responses of characters to situations. Just kind of saying that for me because that is the standard that we are operating out of. Our aim is to incorporate dialogue into the narratives of the following standard grammar conventions. So we're going to go over this do now, and then we're going to get into some independent work where you're going to be working on the dialogue of your narrative. Somebody raise their hand and remind us, what is dialogue anyway? It was a word of the day once upon a time. Dialogue, Uriel correctly answers, is when characters talk to each other, and that's right. So you, if you don't already, are going to be incorporating dialogue into your narratives. Now, this should probably require a lot of work for us because we read a lot of dialogue in Esperanza and Wonder, and every text that we've looked at this year, basically, there's been some dialogue save for the poetry. But I don't know that while we were reading this, we necessarily picked up on some of the rules of dialogue. So we're going to go over those first of all. Let's have, so I assign everybody 1 through 4, something to read, and I'm going to pause after each person reads one of these 4 rules, and we're going to talk about it. So the first rule is put quotation marks around the words that actually come out of people's mouths. Keep he said, she said, and other words outside of the quotes. For example, Karen said, quote, I love basketball. Great. So we knew that already, that there were going to be quotation marks around anything that a person says. Just like we use quotation marks to bookend our details when we do an ADE, we also use quotation marks whenever somebody speaks in a text. You'll see some books go away from this, especially current books like modern literature is starting to disregard these quotation marks, but historically these are very important, and if you see them, then you know that someone is talking. Also, we are definitely going to be using them in our narratives, so we need to learn how to use them correctly. What did we learn there about he said, she said? For instance, if I say Laudelis, or if I say, get out of my way, Laudelis screamed, I would put quotation marks before and at the end of get out of my way, but then I just use a comma to separate Laudelis screamed, and that stays quotation free. That's just describing what's going on. The next rule, capitalize the first word that the speaker says. For example, she shouted, meet me at the gym tonight. That's something that we're used to already, but it's something that we're going to be having you look back at when you construct your dialogues, because since it happens in the middle of the sentence, I think a lot of us are going to be reticent to capitalize. But even though you might say, at the end of the day, she said, pick me up a toothbrush, even though that pick me up a toothbrush occurs in the middle of your sentence, if it's a quotation, then you're going to begin with a capital letter. This is tricky to describe. I'm glad that I'm getting this out now. Number 3, for variety, you can move he said, she said to the end of the sentence. Just make sure you separate the quote with a comma, question mark, or exclamation point positioned to the left of the end of the quotation mark. For example, and these example sentences are really going to give us what we need. Make it $5 for rent. Make if $5 for rent. Joe said. Just pay attention to that. Joe said. The quotation mark ends. There's a comma there. Joe said it. That's how you're going to end your sentence. Next, may I borrow your black bag? Mike asked. You notice how the quotation marks begin and end at can and bag. There's a question mark there. And that's because anytime someone asks a question, then you're going to still use a question mark and then the quotation. Mike asked. I can't believe that's true, shouted Susan. Again, same thing, same situation, except for unlike the first example that had a comma and the second example that had a question mark, we're here using an exclamation point to end the statement of dialogue. Number 4, and this is very important, every time a new character talks, indent for a new paragraph. Even if he or she says only one word. For example, Joe quietly said, Becky, you aren't going to be happy. I broke your iPad. if you're using a quotation, it gets its own paragraph. Just always remember that. Every time a new character talks, indent for a new paragraph. Now, if the same character says one thing and then says another thing, you do not need to indent. That can stay the same. That can stay in the same paragraph. But if two people are talking and they're saying things over and over, then you need to keep indenting, because that's the structure that we're adhering to. And you look at the next line. What? Becky screamed. That's just one word that Becky did. Becky screamed, and it deserves its own paragraph. Okay, turn to the next page and let's practice what we just learned.